Hello one, hello all, welcome to From the Depths for Noobs APS 102, a continuation of my last episode. We're going to go a bit more in depth about APS and their intricacies, starting off with turrets. To properly explain them, this is a 3x3 turret, a 5x5 turret, 7x7, and a 9x9. Despite the texture clipping you see, this is the proper way to make circular turrets without clipping them, with the blue being the gun and the red being the armor around it. If you open up the build menu and go to the sub object tab, you will be able to see templates as how to make up to a 17x17 gun, as well as check out my description. There will be a link to a website that allows you to make a gun up to 31x31. Now, let's talk gauge increasers, and barrels. To start things off, we have a 0 gauge increaser gun at 60mm, with every step in between up to an 8 gauge increaser gun at 500mm. You can also have multiple barrels, and this is not quite as straightforward as take the gauge size and divide it by the number of barrels. It only works for the first time, so this 1 barrel gun is 179, divided by 2, you get roughly 89. That's proper, but from then on, you actually get a kickback to make the gauge slightly larger than it would be otherwise. And what this means is, obviously, if 180 divided by 3 is supposed to be 60, this one is 80, and then 180 divided by 4 should be 45, and this is 82. So like I said, you get a slight gauge increase when you divide by the number of barrels, but you will never get one larger than 500mm. With that out of the way, let's talk APS projectiles. Warning, this is not an APS shell video. I will not be elaborating the best practices or the components or anything. I will just be referencing the more common and useful shell types and showing you one of the simplest ways to make them. To start things off, let's look at HESH. Make one, you need a squash head and several HE bodies. This is good for going through armor and turning that armor into a grenade on the other side. This is called spalling. Next up, we have heat. Use a shaped charge head and several HE bodies. This is good for going through armor with a predetermined payload side and exploding behind said armor. Next, we have hollow point. Hollow point is phenomenal for blowing up on contact with anything. This includes water, any material except shields. Hollow point will pop on anything that's not a shield. You can put frag, black, EMP, or HE behind it and call it a day. Next up, we have kinetics. You would use an AP head or a Sabo head with solid bodies or Sabo bodies. This would be a kinetic projectile. Next, we have disruptors. Remember those shields I told you about, how hollow point doesn't explode on those? Disruptors do a phenomenal job of disabling shields and or weakening them. It simply takes the EMP charge of the projectile being fired and using that to manipulate the amount of strength the shield has. Like I said, I will not be elaborating. That is as simple and bare bones as I can make it. Please wait to the next video so I can do these projectiles justice and go into much further detail. Now then, let's talk about ejectors, one of the more advanced components from last episode. In layman's terms, they take every APS shell, load it in a loader connected to it, and spit them out. With the one caveat is that you do not have an emergency ejection fuse on the projectiles. They will pop out and be a threat to yourself and friendly. So what happens is, if I click this little button right here, you shall see that when this one dies, they vanish. But when this one dies, it spits all of its shells out, and each one of those shells will be potent if it hit anything. So keep that in mind. It's pretty simple in premise, but the proper use and the textures makes it very difficult to incorporate into your build typically, but it's a good idea if you can. Next up, we have laser targeters. These guys are interesting. To put things exceptionally briefly, as long as your projectile has either a timed fuse or an altitude fuse on it, you can use these to modulate when they will explode mid-air without any contact. This is phenomenal for airburst frag, airburst flak, and whatnot to shoot down planes you can't quite hit. So, to show what I'm talking about, if I hit this button right here, that bad guy will blow up exactly 1 second after leaving the barrel. Now, that's useless on its own, but if we were to have it offset by 1/10 of a second, it would fly towards the target, and then once it thinks it's missed, it will blow it up after 1/10 of a second. This next guy right here, he blows up at 75 meters. So boom, as you can see, as soon as he gets up to 75 meters, he explodes, and once again, same dealio. You use the perceived altitude of the target and modulate it very slightly to determine whether or not you missed. It is absolutely phenomenal for using airburst, frag, and flak to make sure that you don't lose that entire projectile into the aether because you happen to miss. Now, let's talk about the black sheep of the family, the 6-way connector. These guys are in an interesting position because I've only ever really seen them used in railguns. However, they are exceptionally useful if you can figure out how to use them. So, they allow you to connect recoil absorbers, railgun chargers, autoloaders, and laser targeters to the main APS, and it can connect to any side except for the very front. So left, right, bottom, above, and behind. However, there's no point putting it behind it because, of course, that's where you need to put your cooling snake and your gauge increasers. The one thing they cannot do, however, is have a gap and connect increasers or coolant elsewhere. If I go into build mode, this is not actually connected. So this does not work, even though these all do. Now, the reason why I call these the black sheep is because they're only really good for making Tetris easier for pieces that don't have multiple point connections. So recoil absorbers, how they only connect right here, that's phenomenal for making things fit. Same with railgun chargers. But like for the autoloaders, these are typically directly next to increasers or coolant, and you don't really need connectors to make them work. And same with this guy, he's usually at the base of the gun connected as well. However, this is possible and it can be used, and these are actually cheaper than coolant. So let's say your gun is already properly balanced with intake, coolant, and loader limit. And let's say you want to connect something, but you don't necessarily need the coolant for it. Well, if you use this bad boy, you will save a few materials and also keep most of your pieces connected to the main firing piece. Okay, last but certainly not least, we have railguns, properly made this time. Before I get into how amazing these guys are and how to use them and how to build them, let's look at the bare essential. You need at least one railgun charger. This is how you get energy from your craft into the gun. You need a magnet attaching fixture. This is how you get the actual the rail to go along the barrel, and then you need the rail magnet. As you can see, this rotates around the barrel. You can turn off the rotation if you don't like it, but this is what actually stores it, so to speak. So for each one of these railgun magnets, your gun will get an additional 5,000 capacity in terms of rail draw. Now then, some of the many amazing features of railguns is you can go completely gunpowderless. So this particular projectile has absolutely no gunpowder on it. This allows a few things. So if you look at this, these guns have 28.2 autoloader and intake limit. Since these are no gunpowder, there's no coolant limit, obviously. But what happens is, you could actually shoot faster than that. I know, with gunpowder you technically cannot, but with railguns you can, because as long as your gun has capacity, you can just fire as fast as you want. So I've got these guys set up to fire at 200 RPM, which not super fast on its own, but that's almost 10 times faster than these could be fired elsewise. Now, it does not mean they reload immediately. It does not mean that they intake immediately. It just means that you can dump what is in the gun at a predetermined speed, so long as you have the capacity to make up for it. It's phenomenal. So, the three headline features for railguns are: 1, you can make a hybrid gun to make your typical gunpowder shell fire faster, go farther, hit harder, and do more armor piercing to get through really thick armor. You can make a completely gunpowderless projectile, which is phenomenal because you can fire as fast as you want so long as you have the capacity, and you can use a bit of the rail charge to buff your accuracy. Personally, that last one is a bit weak because you have to dump so much to get any accuracy out of it, but it's possible. Railguns are one of the many things that make APS one of the most versatile systems in the game, and it's just a phenomenal weapon system. So stay tuned for next time when I go over the actual projectiles and how to get through some really thick armors out there. But that's all I've got time for, guys. Do those YouTube things, like, favorite, subscribe, check out my other videos. That's it. Bye bye.
More than half has been missed.
Yeah, but the bulwark is not happy about the half that didn't miss.
They just decided to roll over. You've got holes in the bottom. Okay, now it's. I think your Seguros is about to end the space.